The fleet hung in the darkness above Earth like predatory birds, their massive ships blotting out entire constellations. Admiral stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Dominion's pride, watching the blue marble below through the viewport. His four arms crossed behind his back in a gesture that his species reserved for moments of absolute certainty. Such a primitive world, he mused to his second-in-command, Colonel In. Their technology is laughably outdated, chemical propulsion, kinetic weapons, how quaint. The bridge crew of the flagship buzzed with quiet confidence. They had conquered 47 worlds in the past century, each one falling within days to their superior technology and tactics. Earth would be no different. The reconnaissance data was clear. Humans possessed no energy weapons, no plasma cannons, no gravitational disruptors. They still threw metal projectiles at each other like barbarians. Colonel In adjusted his ceremonial armor, the same design that had protected warriors for over 300 years. The crystalline plates gleamed under the ship's lighting, each segment carefully crafted from compressed stellar matter and reinforced with quantum-bonded polymers. No kinetic weapon had ever penetrated battle armor. It was physically impossible. "Admiral," the communications officer announced, "we're receiving a transmission from the planet's surface." "Put it through," commanded, his mandibles clicking with amusement. The holographic display flickered to life, showing a human female in what appeared to be a military uniform. She had short brown hair and determined eyes that reminded uncomfortably of the resistance fighters who had given them trouble decades ago. But humans were not. They were soft, weak creatures who had barely managed to reach their own moon. "I am General Sarah speaking for the United Earth Defense Force," the human said. "We know why you're here. We've monitored your communications and observed your tactics against other worlds. We're prepared to discuss terms." Laughed a sound like grinding metal. "Terms? You mistake me for a diplomat, General. I am a conqueror. Your world has resources we require, and your species will serve adequately as a labor force. Surrender now, and I guarantee that at least half of your population will survive the transition to rule." General's expression didn't change. "And if we refuse?" "Then we demonstrate why 47 worlds kneel before the Empire," replied. "Our armor cannot be pierced by your primitive weapons. Our shields can absorb whatever pathetic energy you can muster. Your resistance will last perhaps 6 hours before your governments beg for mercy." "I see," said quietly. "Then I suppose we have nothing left to discuss." The transmission ended, turned to his tactical officer. "Begin orbital bombardment of their major military installations. Focus on the structures they call Pentagon and NORAD. Once their command and control is eliminated, deploy the ground forces." "Yes, Admiral." As the ships powered up their plasma cannons, General sat in a bunker 300 feet beneath the Colorado Mountains, surrounded by dozens of screens showing defensive positions around the globe. She reached for a red phone and spoke a single word: "Implement." Across Earth, in hidden bases and remote facilities, massive doors began to open. Weapons that had been kept secret for decades rolled into the sunlight. Experimental ammunition was loaded into chambers. Prototype rifles were distributed to Special Forces units who had trained for this moment their entire careers. The first dropships descended through Earth's atmosphere like burning meteors, their hulls glowing with re-entry heat. Inside each ship, 50 warriors sat in perfect formation, their armor gleaming, their confidence absolute. They had done this dozens of times before. Human resistance would crumble at the first sight of superiority. The lead dropship touched down in the ruins of what had been downtown Los Angeles, its landing thrusters melting the asphalt into glass. The deployment ramps lowered with hydraulic hisses, and the first warriors stepped onto Earth soil. Captain Orr led the advance squad, his personal armor decorated with the crystal scarring that marked a veteran of 12 campaigns. His men spread out behind him in a perfect tactical formation, energy lances humming with deadly power. The humans had fled, of course. They always did when faced with superior force. "Sector 7 clear," he reported into his communicator. "No sign of resistance, beginning sweep of government buildings." That was when the first shot rang out. The sound was unlike anything they had heard before, not the high whine of energy weapons or the dull thump of explosive charges, but a sharp, distinctive crack that seemed to cut through the air itself. Captain Orr felt something impact his chest plate with tremendous force, sending him stumbling backward. He looked down, expecting to see a small dent or perhaps some scorching from a primitive missile. Instead, he saw something impossible, a perfectly round hole in his armor, with crystalline fractures spreading outward from the point of impact. Whatever had hit him had gone completely through the most advanced personal protection in the galaxy. "Impossible," he whispered, touching the breach in his armor with a trembling finger. Then the second shot came, and Captain Orr fell to his knees as another round punched through his helmet. From rooftops and hidden positions throughout the city, human snipers adjusted their scopes and worked their bolts. The weapons in their hands were not the crude firearms that intelligence had. These were firing depleted uranium penetrators at velocities that approached significant fractions of the speed of light. Each bullet carried kinetic energy equivalent to a small explosive charge, focused into a projectile smaller than a human fingernail. The advance squad began to fall. Their armor, which had turned aside plasma bolts and energy beams for 3 centuries, offered no protection against weapons that operated on principles their technology had never encountered. The quantum-bonded polymers that made their protection so effective against energy weapons became brittle and useless when subjected to the immense kinetic forces of impacts. Back on the flagship, Admiral watched the tactical displays with growing confusion. His ground forces were reporting casualties, which was impossible. The humans had no weapons capable of penetrating armor. "Colonel In, verify these reports," he ordered. "Admiral, I'm showing 17 confirmed kills of our warriors in the first engagement," In replied, his voice tight with disbelief. "The field commanders are requesting immediate support." "What weapons are the humans using?" "Unknown, sir. The warriors report impacts from kinetic projectiles, but our intelligence clearly shows that human weapons are incapable of." Another alarm sounded, then another. Across the globe, dropships were touching down to face the same devastating surprise. In Moscow, a squad of Russian emerged from subway tunnels carrying weapons that fired supercooled liquid nitrogen projectiles, shattering armor through thermal shock. In Tokyo, Japanese special forces used electromagnetic pulse rifles that disrupted the quantum bonds holding the alien armor together at the molecular level. But it was the American forces that proved most devastating. Their technology, developed in secret for decades, turned every human soldier into a sniper capable of engaging warriors at ranges previously thought impossible. The aliens' superior numbers meant nothing when humans could kill them from miles away, shooting through buildings and obstacles with projectiles that nothing could stop. General watched the reports flood in from around the world. The first phase was proceeding exactly as planned. They had made the same mistake that overconfident enemies always made. They had assumed that their past victories guaranteed future success. They had prepared for the war they expected to fight, not the one humanity was actually prepared to wage. "Phase 2, her aide asked. "Not yet," replied, studying the orbital positions of the fleet. "Let them commit more forces first. Let them think this is just a temporary setback. When they send their reserves, then we show them what humanity has really been building." High above Earth's atmosphere, Admiral stared at the tactical displays with a growing sense of unease. This was not how conquests proceeded. This was not how inferior species behaved when faced with might. Something was very, very wrong with the intelligence reports about human capabilities. "Sir," his communications officer called out, "we're receiving another transmission from the planet's surface." Once again, General appeared on the holographic display. But this time, she was standing outside in the ruins of Lowe's Angels, with the smoking wreckage of a drop ship visible behind her. In her hands, she held a weapon that didn't recognize, a sleek metallic device that hummed with barely contained energy. "Admiral," she said, her voice calm and professional, "I thought you might like to know that your supposedly impenetrable armor has failed completely. In the past hour, we've eliminated over 400 of your warriors using weapons you didn't know we possessed. Would you like to reconsider those terms we discussed?" The transmission ended before could respond. He stood in silence for a long moment, his forearms trembling with a mixture of rage and something he had not felt in over 50 years of conquest: fear. The humans were not the primitive species his intelligence had described. The Admiral's mandibles ground together as he processed the impossible reports streaming in from the planet below. 600 warriors dead in the first 4 hours of what should have been a routine conquest. The holographic displays around his command center showed red markers across every major human city where his forces had landed, each one representing fallen soldiers whose armor had failed them. "Colonel In," he commanded, his voice tight with controlled fury. "Deploy the heavy assault division. I want every remaining dropship to concentrate on the human capital they call Washington. If these primitives have somehow acquired weapons capable of penetrating basic armor, they will not stand against our advanced units." Colonel In hesitated at his console. In all his years serving under, he had never seen the admiral so rattled. The military doctrine had been built on the absolute supremacy of their personal protection systems. To see that foundation crumbling was like watching the laws of physics themselves break down. "Sir, perhaps we should withdraw and analyze these new human weapons before committing more forces," In suggested carefully. His head snapped toward his second-in-command, his 4 eyes blazing with indignation. "Withdraw? We are the Empire. We do not retreat from primitives who have barely learned to leave their own planet. Deploy the heavy assault division immediately." Deep beneath the Pentagon, General Sarah watched the orbital reconnaissance feeds as massive ships began disgorging a new wave of drop pods. These were different from the first wave, larger, heavier, with more sophisticated armor plating visible even from space. She turned to her chief science advisor, Doctor, who had been monitoring the engagement through his network of sensors. "What are we looking at?" she asked. Doctor adjusted his glasses as he studied the incoming data. The new dropships are carrying approximately twice as many troops, and their biosignatures suggest enhanced armor systems. Based on our analysis of the first engagement, they've probably upgraded to military-grade crystalline composites instead of the standard-issue gear their initial forces were wearing. "Will our current weapons be effective?" "They should still work, but we'll need higher velocity and better penetrators. I'm uploading the specifications for our experimental tungsten carbide rounds to all units now. The electromagnetic pulse weapons might be less effective against the enhanced armor, though." General nodded and activated her secure communication system. Across the globe, Special Forces units that had been held in reserve during the first engagement began moving into position. These were not the conventional soldiers who had ambushed the initial landing. These were the products of humanity's most classified military programs, enhanced soldiers carrying weapons that pushed the very boundaries of human engineering. The new dropships descended through Earth's atmosphere with significantly more caution than their predecessors. Captain Orr, leading the Heavy Assault Division's primary strike team, had reviewed the combat footage from the first engagement with growing unease. The humans had somehow developed kinetic weapons that treated armor like paper. His enhanced suit, however, was a different matter entirely. The crystalline plates covering his body were twice as thick as standard issue and reinforced with rare metals harvested from the cores of dead stars. His helmet incorporated quantum field generators that could deflect energy attacks and even slow incoming projectiles. If any armor could withstand whatever tricks the humans had developed, it would be his. The dropship touched down in a crater that had once been the National Mall, its landing thrusters sending up clouds of vaporized concrete and steel. As the deployment ramps lowered, Captain Orr led his 50 warriors onto the devastated battlefield. Unlike the first wave, his soldiers moved with extreme caution, using advanced sensors to scan for threats and maintaining maximum dispersion to avoid concentrated fire. "Thermal scans show multiple heat sources in the surrounding structures," reported Sergeant Al, his enhanced armor bristling with detection equipment. "Range approximately 800 meters. "Confirmed," Orr replied. "All units maximum alertness. These humans have proven more resourceful than anticipated. Advance by squads, maintain cover discipline." The Heavy Assault Division began its methodical advance through the rubble of Washington, D.C. Their enhanced armor systems provided them with detailed tactical information about their environment, highlighting potential threats and safe routes through the debris. They were prepared for anything the humans might throw at them. They were not prepared for Lieutenant Sarah Martinez. Martinez crouched in the ruins of the Lincoln Memorial, her modified M2010 enhanced sniper weapon system resting on an improvised bipod made from rebar and concrete. The weapon in her hands bore little resemblance to conventional sniper rifles. Doctor's team had spent 3 years converting it into something approaching science fiction. A magnetically accelerated kinetic kill system capable of launching tungsten carbide penetrators at velocities that traditional firearms could never achieve. Through her advanced scope, she tracked the leading warrior as he moved between the remains of government buildings. His armor was visibly different from the first wave, thicker, more sophisticated, with energy fields shimmering around the surface. Intelligence had warned them that the aliens would adapt quickly. Martinez made minute adjustments to her scope and breathing, calculating wind resistance, gravity drop, and target movement with the precision that had made her one of the Army's most decorated snipers. At her fingertips, she could feel the slight vibration of the magnetic coils charging, building power for a shot that would test the limits of both her weapon and the alien's protection. She squeezed the trigger. The tungsten carbide penetrator left the barrel at nearly 3% the speed of light, its passage through the air creating a momentary vacuum that produced a sound like thunder splitting the sky. It struck Captain Or's enhanced helmet with kinetic energy equivalent to a small artillery shell focused into a projectile the size of a needle. The quantum field generators around Or's armor flared brilliant white as they attempted to deflect the incoming projectile. For a microsecond, the enhanced protection systems held, slowing the penetrator and dispersing its energy across multiple crystalline matrices. Then the tungsten carbide tip punched through the quantum field like it was made of glass, shattered the enhanced helmet plating, and continued its deadly trajectory. Captain Orr collapsed without a sound, his supposedly invincible armor smoking from the impact crater in his skull. The remaining warriors of the heavy assault division froze in shock. Their enhanced equipment had detected the incoming projectile less than 1,000th of a second before impact, far too late for evasive action. The humans had weapons that could kill them faster than their own sensors could track. "All units take cover," Sergeant Al screamed into his communicator, diving behind the twisted remains of a military vehicle. "Unknown weapon system, extreme range capability." But there was nowhere to hide. Martinez was not alone in the ruins of Washington. Concealed in buildings and shelters across the city, 24 human snipers adjusted their scopes and began the methodical destruction of the heavy assault division. Each shot was a small engineering miracle, magnetic acceleration systems, pushing exotic metal penetrators to velocities that turned kinetic energy into a fundamental force of destruction. The aliens tried to adapt. They activated personal energy shields, deployed smoke screens, even attempted to retreat to their drop ships. Nothing worked. The human weapons seemed to ignore every defensive measure that could deploy. Enhanced armor that had protected its wearers through a dozen campaigns cracked and shattered under impacts that no technology in the arsenal could match. Aboard the flagship, Admiral watched his most elite forces die with the same systematic efficiency that had characterized the destruction of the first wave. The tactical displays showed his casualties climbing past 800, then 900, then crossing the 1,000 mark, as the last members of the heavy assault division fell to weapons that shouldn't exist. "How," he whispered, staring at the holographic readouts, "how are they doing this?" Doctor, monitoring the engagement from his underground command center, smiled grimly as he watched the effectiveness statistics roll across his screens. The tungsten carbide penetrators were performing exactly as his models had predicted. The armor, for all its sophistication, was designed to deflect energy-based attacks. It had never been tested against pure kinetic force delivered at relativistic velocities. "General," he reported over the secure channel, "the enhanced rounds are showing 97% effectiveness against their improved armor. Whatever they're using for protection, it can't handle direct kinetic transfer at these energy levels." "Excellent," replied. "How many more surprises do they have for us?" "Unknown, but they're learning fast. Each wave has shown improved defensive capabilities. We should expect them to try something different soon." As if summoned by prediction, new alarms began sounding throughout the underground command center. The orbital sensors were detecting massive energy buildups aboard the flagship. Whatever Admiral was planning next, it would dwarf everything that had come before. General studied the energy readings with growing concern. The power levels being generated by the alien ships were approaching theoretical maximums for their technology. Either they were preparing to retreat, or they were about to escalate the conflict in ways that could threaten the entire planet. "All units," she broadcast to her forces around the globe, "prepare for Phase 3 protocols. The aliens are about to show us what they do when subtle tactics fail." Above Earth's atmosphere, Admiral stood before the massive holographic display that dominated his flagship's command center. His four arms moved across the control interfaces with deadly precision as he accessed weapons systems that had never been used against a planetary target. If the humans wanted to match technology with their primitive kinetic weapons, he would show them what happened when an advanced civilization stopped holding back. All ships, he broadcast to his fleet, prepare orbital bombardment systems, target all major human population centers. If we cannot take this world through ground assault, we will crack it like an egg and take. Plasma cannons of the fleet began their charging sequence with a sound like distant thunder rolling across the void. Admiral watched the energy readings climb toward critical mass, his mandibles clicking with savage satisfaction. The humans had proven unexpectedly resourceful with their kinetic weapons, but they were about to learn why ground-based forces were irrelevant when facing a civilization that had mastered stellar engineering. Targeting solutions confirmed on all major population centers, reported his weapons officer. Primary targets include New York, London, Tokyo, Moscow, and the human capital. Secondary targets encompass all major military installations and industrial centers. Power at 60% and climbing, announced the engineering station. Estimated time to full charge, 43 seconds. Colonel In stood beside his admiral, watching the preparations with growing unease. Orbital bombardment of this magnitude would render the planet uninhabitable for decades. The resources they had come to claim would be irradiated slag, and the human workforce would be reduced to ash and radiation shadows. "Sir," he said carefully, "perhaps we should reconsider the scope of the bombardment. A more limited strike might achieve our objectives without destroying the planet's value." His head swiveled toward his second-in-command with mechanical precision. "The humans have humiliated the Empire. They have destroyed over 1,000 of our finest warriors with primitive weapons. They will burn for this insult, and their world will serve as an example to any other species that might consider defying us." Deep beneath the Colorado Mountains, General Sarah watched the energy signatures building in the alien ships with a mixture of anticipation and dread. The moment she had both hoped for and feared was finally arriving. For 30 years, humanity had prepared for this exact scenario. Now they would discover if their preparations had been sufficient. "Doctor," she said into her communicator, "orbital bombardment is imminent. Are our countermeasures ready?" His voice crackled back through the speakers, tight with tension. "Project Aegis is fully operational. All satellites are in position and the ground-based systems are powered up. But General, we've never tested this at full scale. The theoretical models are solid, but—" "I understand the risks, Doctor. Initiate Project Aegis on my mark." Turn to the massive display screens that dominated the command center, showing tactical information from around the globe. Hidden in bunkers and mountain facilities across Earth, weapon systems that had consumed half the planet's military budget were powering up. Electromagnetic, the size of office buildings prepared to fire projectiles into space. Laser arrays that could slice through battleship armor focused their beams on targeting computers. Most importantly, the orbital defense satellites that had been disguised as communications equipment for the past decade revealed their true nature as kinetic bombardment platforms. They were about to discover that humans had not spent the last 50 years sitting idle while scanning the galaxy for threats. 30 seconds to bombardment, Doctor announced. Aegis systems are green across the board. Aboard the flagship, Admiral watched the final countdown with growing satisfaction. The plasma cannons had reached 80% charge, more than enough to begin the systematic destruction of human civilization. In less than half a minute, this troublesome world would be a monument to power. "Sir," the sensor operator's voice cracked with alarm, "I'm detecting massive energy buildups across the planet's surface. Multiple sources, power levels approaching our own weapon systems." "Impossible," snarled. "Human technology is centuries behind our own. They couldn't possibly." His words were cut off by the flash of light any of them had ever seen. From the surface of Earth, humanity's hidden defense network had come alive. The first volley consisted of tungsten rods launched from orbital platforms that had masqueraded as weather satellites for over a decade. Each rod was 6 meters long, weighing several tons, and accelerated to velocities that turned them into kinetic weapons of unimaginable power. They struck the ships with the force of nuclear explosions, punching through energy shields and armor plating designed to withstand the most advanced weapons in the galaxy. The second volley came from the planet's surface itself. Electromagnetic hidden in mountain complexes fired streams of depleted uranium penetrators into space, each projectile guided by quantum computers toward specific targets on the alien vessels. They watched in horror as their supposedly invincible ships began to suffer catastrophic hull breaches. But it was the third volley that truly demonstrated humanity's technological revolution. From stations concealed beneath the Pacific Ocean, massive laser arrays began firing coherent beams of energy that made the plasma cannons look like flashlights. These were not the primitive chemical lasers that human intelligence suggested. They were quantum cascade systems that focused the energy of contained fusion reactions into beams capable of cutting through stellar matter. Admiral stumbled as his flagship shuddered under multiple impacts. Around him, control consoles exploded in showers of sparks as the ship's systems struggled to cope with damage that should have been impossible for human weapons to inflict. "Damage report," he roared over the chaos. "Hull breaches on decks 7 through 15, his engineering officer shouted back. "Primary weapon systems are offline. Shield generators are failing across the fleet." The tactical display showed a nightmare scenario. Of his 12 capital ships, 3 were already suffering critical damage from the human counterstrike. The smaller vessels were faring even worse. Frigates and destroyers that had survived battles against advanced civilizations were being systematically destroyed by weapons that shouldn't exist. Howe demanded, watching another of his ships suffer a direct hit from what appeared to be a lance of pure energy. "How do they have weapons of this caliber?" Colonel In, bleeding from a head wound caused by falling debris, managed to access the sensor readings. What he saw there violated everything he thought he knew about technological development. "Admiral, the energy signatures suggest that the humans have achieved controlled fusion, quantum computing, and electromagnetic field manipulation at scales comparable to our own technology. This is not a primitive species. They've been hiding their true capabilities." On the surface of Earth, Doctor monitored the effectiveness of humanity's hidden arsenal with fierce satisfaction. The kinetic orbital strikes were performing exactly as designed, overwhelming the aliens' defensive systems through pure physical force. The ground-based were maintaining a continuous barrage that prevented the ships from regenerating their shields. Most importantly, the laser arrays were demonstrating that human engineering could match anything the galaxy had to offer. "General," he reported, "enemy fleet is suffering severe casualties. We've confirmed kills on at least 4 capital ships, with heavy damage to all remaining vessels. Their plasma cannon systems appear to be completely offline." "Casualties on our side?" "Minimal. The orbital platforms are operating within acceptable parameters, and all ground installations are fully functional. The aliens never expected return fire of this magnitude." General allowed herself a small smile. Humanity had spent decades preparing for this moment, developing weapons in secret while allowing the galaxy to believe they were still throwing rocks at each other. The deception had been costly and dangerous, but it was about to pay off in the most spectacular fashion possible. "Initiate Phase 4, she commanded. "Let's show them what happens when they threaten our world." Across the globe, missile silos that had been empty for decades suddenly revealed their true contents. These were not the nuclear weapons that international treaties had supposedly eliminated, but something far more sophisticated. Antimatter warheads, each one containing enough destructive power to obliterate a small moon, began their automated launch sequences. Admiral watched the tactical display as dozens of new contacts appeared on his sensors, rising from the planet's surface on trajectories that would intersect his fleet in less than 10 minutes. The energy signatures were unlike anything in the database, exotic matter reactions, that suggested the humans had achieved theoretical physics that the Empire's scientists had deemed impossible. "All ships," he broadcast in growing desperation, "emergency jump procedures, plot courses for the outer system." "Sir," his navigation officer replied, "our jump drives are severely damaged. The human weapons appear to have specifically targeted our FTL systems. We're trapped in this system until repairs can be completed." The irony was not lost on. He had come to Earth expecting to add another easy conquest to the Empire's collection. Instead, he found himself facing an enemy that had turned every assumption about human capabilities into a deadly trap. They had allowed the to come to them, to commit their forces to a battle where humanity held every advantage. As the first antimatter warheads began to detonate in the space around his fleet, Admiral realized that he was not the hunter in this scenario. He was the prey, and the humans had been patient predators indeed. The explosions that followed lit up half the galaxy, visible to ships and stations thousands of light years away. When the energy signatures finally faded, the mighty fleet that had conquered 47 worlds was reduced to burning wreckage and radioactive debris. But the war was far from over. Deep in the surviving sections of his flagship, Admiral activated an emergency beacon that would summon every warship within 50 light-years. If humanity wanted to reveal their true technological capabilities, then the Empire would respond with the full weight of its military might. The humans had won the opening battle through deception and superior firepower, but they had also announced their existence to a galaxy full of civilizations that would not appreciate being deceived by supposed primitives. General, watching the orbital debris slowly fall toward Earth's atmosphere, knew that this victory was only the beginning. Humanity had revealed itself to the galaxy as a technological power, and every 3 months after the destruction of the invasion fleet, Admiral's emergency beacon had accomplished its intended purpose. The twisted wreckage of his flagship drifted in Earth's outer orbit, but its distress signal had traveled across the galaxy at faster-than-light speeds, carrying with it detailed recordings of humanity's hidden weapons and technological capabilities. In the Rigel system, Fleet Admiral of the Hegemony Navy studied the tactical recordings with growing alarm. The humans had not simply defeated them through superior numbers or lucky tactics. They had demonstrated technological sophistication that rivaled the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy. Kinetic weapons with relativistic velocities, antimatter warheads, orbital defense platforms disguised as primitive satellites. These were not the tools of a species that had barely achieved interplanetary flight. Analysis confirms that human technology appears to equal or exceed our own capabilities in several key areas, reported his chief science officer, a thin hegemony citizen whose 4 arms moved rapidly across multiple control interfaces. Their electromagnetic acceleration systems are approximately 30% more efficient than our current designs. The antimatter containment methods they employed show complete mastery of exotic matter physics. His mandibles clicked with irritation. The hegemony had spent 3 centuries building its galactic empire on the assumption that technological advancement followed predictable patterns. Young civilizations developed chemical rockets, then fusion drives, then eventually achieved faster-than-light travel. They did not leap directly from primitive to weapons that could destroy established fleets. "What is the assessment of our regarding human psychology?" he asked. The science officer consulted another display. "Extremely concerning, sir. The humans demonstrated exceptional capacity for long-term strategic deception. They allowed themselves to appear primitive for decades while secretly developing advanced weapons systems. This suggests a species-wide ability to coordinate massive military projects while maintaining operational security on a scale we have never encountered." "In other words," said grimly, "they are natural-born liars with the patience to prepare for wars they cannot yet fight." "That is a crude but accurate assessment, sir." The fleet admiral turned to study the holographic display showing current hegemony fleet dispositions. 48 star systems fell under hegemony control, each one contributing resources and personnel to the greatest military force the galaxy had ever seen. But if the human recordings were accurate, that force might not be sufficient to contain a species that had hidden its true capabilities for so long. "Signal the High Command," he ordered. "I am recommending immediate mobilization of the entire hegemony navy. If the humans represent the threat I believe they do, we need to strike before they have time to prepare additional surprises." Simultaneously, in 17 different star systems, similar conversations were taking place as the recordings of humanity's victory spread throughout the galactic community. The who had maintained their empire through careful diplomatic manipulation watched the human tactical displays with growing respect and concern. The Crystalline Collective, a hive-mind species that had conquered through pure technological superiority, began recalculating their expansion plans to account for unexpected human capabilities. Most disturbing of all, the Void Hunters, ancient entities that fed on the life energy of entire worlds, stirred from their long slumber with renewed interest. They had ignored Earth because its primitive inhabitants seemed barely worth consuming. Now, the humans had revealed themselves as a species with technology that might actually pose a threat to creatures that had survived the deaths of galaxies. Doctor sat in his underground laboratory beneath the Colorado mountains, surrounded by holographic displays showing long-range sensor data from across the galaxy. The electromagnetic signatures were unmistakable. Massive fleets were being assembled in every major star system within 100 light-years of Earth. Humanity's victory over them had been meant to serve as a warning to potential invaders. Instead, it had painted a target on their world that could be seen from halfway across the galaxy. "General," he said into his communicator, "we have a problem. Multiple civilizations are mobilizing significant military assets. I'm detecting at least 12 major fleets beginning movement toward our sector." General's voice crackled back through the speakers with barely controlled tension. "How long do we have?" "Based on the FTL capabilities we observed from I estimate between 6 and 8 months before the first fleets reach Earth. The good news is that they'll be arriving piecemeal rather than as a coordinated assault. The bad news is that some of these fleets are significantly larger than anything the deployed." Closed her eyes and rubbed her temples. Humanity's grand deception had worked too well. They had wanted to demonstrate that Earth was not an easy target for conquest, but instead they had convinced every advanced civilization in the region that humans represented an existential threat that needed to be eliminated. "Doctor, what is the status of Project Prometheus?" His fingers flew across his control interfaces, calling up files that were classified beyond even the highest levels of government security. "The first-generation vessels are approximately 60% complete. We could have basic FTL capability within 4 months, but the weapons systems won't be fully operational for at least 8 months. That's cutting it very close." "Agreed, but General, there's something else you need to know. The long-range sensors are detecting energy signatures consistent with Void Hunter activity in the Vega system. If they're taking interest in our sector, we may be facing threats that make conventional military fleets look like children with toys." General felt a chill run down her spine. Humanity's intelligence services had spent decades the various species and civilizations that populated their section of the galaxy. The Void Hunters were mentioned in the oldest records of every surviving species, ancient entities of immense power that periodically emerged from the depths of space to consume entire worlds. Most civilizations considered them legends or myths. Humanity's scientists had suspected they were all too real. "How many ships are we talking about?" "Unknown. The Void Hunters don't use conventional technology. Their vessels appear to be grown rather than built, and they operate on principles our physics cannot fully explain. What we do know is that they've destroyed civilizations far more advanced than anything else we've encountered." Stared at the display screens showing the approaching fleets with growing desperation. Humanity had prepared for war against conventional enemies using conventional tactics. They had not prepared to fight gods. "Doctor, I need you to accelerate every aspect of Project Prometheus. Strip resources from every other program if necessary. If we're going to survive what's coming, we need every advantage we can get." "Understood. But General, even with unlimited resources, there are physical limitations to how quickly we can complete the project. We're dealing with technologies that push the boundaries of known physics." "Then push harder. If the ancient records are accurate, the survival of our species may depend on it." In the depths of space between galaxies, something vast and hungry stirred in response to the electromagnetic echoes of Earth's orbital battle. The Void Hunters had slept for 3,000 years, waiting for civilizations to develop the technology that made them worth consuming. The energy signatures from the human suggested that another species had finally achieved the technological sophistication to provide adequate nourishment. The creature that called itself Devourer of Suns began the long process of awakening its brood siblings scattered throughout the cosmic void. Soon, they would feast on the life energy of an entire planet. But first, they would need to determine if this new species possessed the capacity to threaten their feeding. The recordings that had spread throughout the galaxy were most intriguing. These humans had demonstrated remarkable tactical awareness and technological innovation. More importantly, they had shown the ability to prepare for threats they could not yet perceive, a trait that the Void Hunters had encountered in only a handful of species throughout their eons of existence. Such species required special attention. They either became useful servants or necessary casualties. The massive entity that had once devoured the Empire began plotting a course toward Earth's solar system. The journey would take several months, even at the speeds the Void Hunters could achieve. That would provide adequate time to observe how the humans responded to the conventional fleets that were already moving toward their world. If humanity proved capable of defeating the hegemony, the Crystalline Collective, and the other civilizations that were converging on Earth, then the Void Hunters would know they faced a species worthy of their full attention. If the humans fell to conventional assault, then the Void Hunters would simply consume whatever remained. Either way, the ancient entities would feed well. General stood in the expanded command center that had been carved into the heart of Mount Cheyenne, watching the tactical displays with a calm expression that had earned her the respect of every military officer on Earth. Around her, hundreds of technicians and analysts worked frantically to prepare humanity's response to the greatest threat their species had ever faced. "Status report," she called out to her staff. "Project Prometheus construction is proceeding ahead of schedule," reported her chief engineer. "We've completed the first 3 vessels and begun construction on the next batch. FTL systems are testing within acceptable parameters." Orbital defenses. Expanded to include 17 additional platforms. Each one carries enough firepower to destroy a capital ship. The ground-based installations have been tripled, and we've completed construction of the lunar mass driver. Ground forces. All major population centers are now protected by enhanced kinetic barriers. Every civilian over the age of 16 has received basic military training and access to personal weapons. If the aliens try another ground invasion, they'll discover that every human on the planet is a potential sniper. Nodded with satisfaction. Humanity had learned from their first encounter with galactic civilization. They would not be caught unprepared again. But as she watched the long-range sensors tracking the approaching alien fleets, she knew that their next test would make the invasion look like a training exercise. The galaxy had taken notice of humanity's 6 months after humanity's devastating victory over the invasion fleet. The first of the Galactic Alliance forces emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of Earth's solar system. Fleet Admiral of the Hegemony Navy commanded a force that dwarfed anything the galaxy had seen in living memory. 43 capital ships, over 200 cruisers and destroyers, and support vessels carrying enough firepower to sterilize entire star systems. But he was not alone. The Crystalline Collective had contributed 17 of their massive hive ships, each one carrying millions of warrior drones with enhanced armor specifically designed to counter human kinetic weapons. The Empire deployed their most advanced stealth frigates, capable of phasing in and out of normal space to avoid detection. Even the normally reclusive Quantum Syndicate had contributed their experimental time dilation vessels, ships that could slow local time to make themselves nearly invulnerable to conventional attacks. "Joint fleet strength at 96% of operational capacity," reported the Hegemony tactical officer. "All Allied forces report ready for engagement." Studied the holographic displays showing Earth hanging in space like a blue jewel, surrounded by the orbital defense platforms that had destroyed the fleet. Long-range sensors detected massive electromagnetic signatures across the planet's surface, indicating that the humans had spent their preparation time well. But no single world could stand against the combined might of 4 galactic civilizations. "Signal all commands," he ordered. "Begin the assault." The combined fleet began its systematic advance toward Earth, their formation carefully designed to overwhelm the planet's defenses through sheer numerical superiority. Each ship maintained maximum defensive fields and electronic countermeasures, ready to absorb whatever kinetic weapons the humans could deploy. They had studied the recordings of the defeat and adapted their tactics accordingly. They were not prepared for what humanity had built during their months of frantic preparation. General Sarah stood in the command center buried 3 miles beneath Mount Cheyenne, watching the incoming alien armada with the same calm expression she had worn during the first invasion. But this time, she was not relying solely on Earth's defenses. This time, humanity would take the fight to the enemy. "Doctor," she said into her communicator, "initiate Project Prometheus. All vessels deploy to engagement positions." In hidden shipyards scattered throughout the asteroid belt, massive doors began opening to reveal humanity's greatest secret. The ships that emerged bore no resemblance to the primitive chemical rockets that galactic intelligence had. These were sleek vessels of impossible design, their hulls incorporating technology that pushed the boundaries of known physics. The UES Defiance, humanity's first true starship, powered up its experimental fusion drives and began accelerating toward the alien fleet at velocities that should have torn any conventional vessel apart. Its captain, former Navy SEAL Maria Santos, watched the tactical displays with fierce anticipation. Her ship carried weapons that would make the orbital look like toy cannons. "Captain," her tactical officer reported, "we have confirmed locks on the lead hegemony capital ships. All weapon systems are operational and ready for engagement." "Excellent," Santos replied. "Let's show them what humanity has learned about shipbuilding." The Defiance opened fire at maximum range, its primary weapon a massive electromagnetic cannon that fired tungsten carbide penetrators at significant fractions of light speed. But these were not simple kinetic weapons. Each projectile was guided by quantum computers and surrounded by localized gravity fields that allowed them to maneuver in flight and penetrate even the most advanced defensive systems. Fleet Admiral watched in disbelief as his flagship's shields collapsed under a single impact from the human vessel. The projectile that had somehow penetrated his ship's defenses continued through 17 decks before finally coming to rest in the engine compartment, its passage having destroyed critical systems throughout the ship. "Impossible," he whispered, staring at the damage reports flooding his displays. "That vessel is barely a tenth our size. It cannot possibly carry weapons of such magnitude." His science officer was frantically analyzing sensor readings from the human ship. "Admiral, the energy signatures are unlike anything in our databases. They appear to be using controlled quantum tunneling to bypass our shields entirely. The projectiles are manipulating space-time itself to reach their targets." "And the propulsion system?" "Unknown, sir. They're achieving accelerations that should be impossible given their apparent mass. Either they've discovered some fundamental principle of physics that our science has missed, or they're using technology so advanced that it appears to violate natural law." Around them, the combined galactic fleet began suffering casualties as more human vessels emerged from hidden positions throughout the solar system. Each ship was unique, incorporating experimental technologies that had been developed in complete secrecy. Plasma cannons that fired streams of contained stellar fire, gravity weapons that could crush enemy vessels by manipulating local space-time. Most terrifying of all, quantum disruption devices that could cause matter itself to simply cease existing. But humanity's greatest surprise was yet to be revealed. Deep in the belt, the massive construction platform designated Prometheus Station had been humanity's most ambitious project. A shipyard capable of building vessels that incorporated technologies reverse-engineered from theoretical physics and enemy combat data. For 6 months, every resource Earth could spare had been poured into a single, desperate gamble. The vessel that emerged from Prometheus Station was barely recognizable as a human creation. The UES Retribution measured nearly 2 kilometers in length and incorporated technology that seemed to blur the line between science and magic. Its hull was constructed from exotic matter that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Its weapon systems drew power directly from miniaturized black holes contained within the ship's core. Most importantly, it carried humanity's ultimate weapon, a device that Doctor's team had designated the Quantum Cascade Torpedo. If their theoretical models were correct, a single warhead could trigger a chain reaction that would transform matter into energy at the subatomic level. The potential yield was beyond calculation. Captain James Harrison, formerly of the Air Force's most classified Black Projects Division, stood on the bridge of the Retribution and prepared to test humanity's theoretical mastery over the fundamental forces of reality. "All stations report ready," his executive officer announced. "Quantum Cascade Torpedo is armed and targeted at the center of the enemy formation." "Fire," Harrison commanded. The torpedo that left the Retribution's launch tube looked deceptively simple, a sleek missile barely larger than a conventional nuclear warhead. But as it approached the galactic fleet, it began emitting energy signatures that caused every sensor in the solar system to register readings beyond their maximum scales. Fleet Admiral watched the incoming weapon with growing horror, as his science teams provided increasingly desperate assessments of its capabilities. Admiral, that device appears to be manipulating quantum foam at the subatomic level. If it detonates in the center of our formation, the cascade effect could. The torpedo detonated. For a microsecond, a new sun blazed in the darkness between planets as matter converted directly to energy in a chain reaction that spread through the galactic fleet like wildfire. Ships that had survived battles across the galaxy simply ceased to exist, their atoms dispersing into component energy as the quantum cascade consumed everything within a sphere of destruction nearly a light second across. When the energy finally dissipated, barely a dozen ships remained of the greatest military force the galaxy had ever assembled. Those vessels that had survived did so only because they had been at the extreme edges of the formation and had immediately jumped to faster-than-light speeds the moment their sensors detected the impossible energy readings. Admiral found himself commanding a single, heavily damaged cruiser, the sole surviving hegemony vessel from a fleet that had numbered in the hundreds. His ship's systems were failing, his crew was decimated, and his certainty about humanity's place in the galactic order had been shattered as completely as his fleet. "Signal all surviving vessels," he ordered with a voice that trembled with shock and newfound respect. "Emergency retreat to Rally Point 7. Transmit all combat data to High Command with Priority 1 classification." As the remnants of the Galactic Alliance fled Earth's solar system, their emergency transmissions carried a message that would fundamentally reshape every civilization's understanding of human capabilities. These were not primitive beings who had stumbled upon advanced weapons. They were a species that had achieved theoretical mastery over the fundamental forces of reality itself. Doctor monitored the retreating ships from his command center, simultaneously elated by humanity's victory and terrified by its implications. The quantum cascade torpedo had worked exactly as their models predicted, but its successful deployment meant that humanity now possessed weapons capable of destroying not just fleets or planets, but entire star systems. "General," he reported, "all enemy forces have retreated beyond the orbit of Pluto. We're detecting emergency transmissions being broadcast across the galaxy. I suspect word of our capabilities will spread very quickly." "And the Void Hunters?" His expression grew grim as he consulted his long-range sensors. "Still approaching from the galactic rim. Their estimated arrival time is unchanged. General, I don't think conventional weapons, even our advanced ones, will be effective against entities that old and powerful." Nodded slowly. Humanity had won a great victory, but in doing so they had announced their presence to forces that existed beyond the normal constraints of physics and mortality. The Void Hunters would not be impressed by quantum torpedoes or impossible starships. They would require different tactics entirely. "Doctor, begin Phase 5. If we're going to face gods, we need to prepare accordingly." "Understood, General. Initiating Project Ascension." Across the galaxy, the surviving members of the Galactic Alliance filed reports that fundamentally changed every civilization's threat assessment protocols. Humanity was no longer classified as a primitive species suitable for conquest or manipulation. They were now listed as a Class Omega civilization, entities possessing technology so advanced that direct confrontation should be avoided at all costs. But in the depths of intergalactic space, the Void Hunters received these reports with something approaching satisfaction. Finally, after a feeding on barely sentient species, they had found prey worthy of their attention. The humans would provide excellent nourishment, assuming they proved unable to threaten beings that had existed since before the galaxy itself was born. The real war was about to begin. As General watched the tactical displays showing Earth's first successful defense of their solar system, she allowed herself a moment of pride in what humanity had accomplished. They had gone from a species that barely understood faster-than-light travel to builders of weapons that could rewrite the laws of physics in less than a year. But she also knew that their greatest challenge still lay ahead. The Void Hunters were coming, and against entities that had survived the deaths of galaxies, even humanity's miraculous technology might not be enough. The age of human dominance in their local region of space had begun. Whether it would last longer than the next few months remained to be seen. In hidden laboratories across Earth, scientists worked frantically on Project Ascension. humanity's attempt to transcend physical limitations entirely. If they could not match the Void Hunter's ancient power through technology alone, perhaps they could evolve beyond the need for physical existence altogether. The final battle for humanity's future would not be fought with ships and weapons. It would be fought with consciousness itself, capabilities, and the response would be overwhelming. The only question was whether humanity's preparations would be sufficient to survive what was coming. In 6 months, they would have their answer. Advanced civilization would now have to decide whether the humans were potential allies or threats that needed to be eliminated. The age of human isolation was over. The age of galactic warfare had just survives. The massive plasma cannons that lined the hulls of the fleet began to glow with contained stellar fire. Each weapon was capable of melting continents, turning oceans to steam, reducing mountains to glass. In 60 seconds, they would demonstrate why 47 worlds knelt before the Empire. Admiral had made his second critical mistake. He still believed he was fighting primitives, or something else entirely, something dangerous, something that had been waiting for them to make the first mistake of underestimating them. And now, for the first time in his long military career, Admiral began to wonder if the Empire might have chosen the wrong world to conquer.